Hello, everyone, and welcome to another presentation of Advocate with Abkarian. Today, we have a very special guest. We have with us Assemblywoman Laura Friedman from the 43rd Assembly District. She's agreed to join us today. And Assemblywoman, thank you. Thank you again for coming in and joining us and giving us some of your time. I know how crazy it is in this day and age.
Thank you, Albert. It's really a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
First of all, let's talk about a little bit of your background first. We've never had you on the show, and looking forward to hearing a little bit about your background, what you do, and then from there we'll go into tackling more important issues.
Great. So currently I have the honor of representing the 43rd Assembly District in the state legislature. So my district encompasses Glendale, Burbank, La Cañada, La Crescenta, and then parts of the eastern parts of City of Los Angeles. So East Hollywood, Los Feliz, Silver Lake, and Atwater. Before that, I sat on the Glendale City Council for 2 terms, almost 8 years, serving as mayor for 1 term. And prior to that, I was in business. I was a film executive, film and television executive, and I also have a small retail business. And I was a design review board commissioner for the city of Glendale for 5 years before I ran for city council in 2009. So many years in the district. I've lived in Glendale since 2000. And before that, I was right next door in Los Feliz for several years.
I've known you for about that long, and I have nothing but good things to say about you. Again, it's very hard to find a Republican and a Democrat that usually have a lot of respect for each other, but I have a lot of respect for what you do and what you've done in the state.
Thank you.
Let me just tell you, of course, we're going to be talking about COVID-19. This is the topic of the day, and it's an unfortunate topic to be discussing. But I wanted to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about how the state assembly and how the governor work together in reference to tackling the COVID-19 pandemic right now.
Well, this has been an emerging situation, and one that's really unprecedented as far as I know, for all levels of government. And part of the challenge has been how we coordinate our efforts and work together when we're supposed to be socially isolating each other. So in March, the legislature adjourned. Before we adjourned, we allocated $1 billion in emergency funding from our general fund to go to the governor to be spent on COVID-19 relief. We have spent the last month and a half, almost 2 months now, working on the issue really from our own homes, but connected through the internet and through telephone. I've spent every day doing teletown halls, working with my constituents, making phone calls to stakeholders across the district, everyone from hospital administrators to frontline service providers, our homeless shelters, people who run the food pantries, our nonprofit organizations, our cultural institutions, our schools, all of them, to make sure that they have what they need as best as I can help to deal with the crisis. I want to make sure that nobody falls between the cracks, that no portion of our very diverse community is overlooked, and that we get assistance out as best we can. And that's been taking a lot of time. So I have 8 staffers. I have 4 staffers in Sacramento and 4 staffers here in the district, and they are all working. They're all working full time, mostly remotely from home. But if you call my office, and people do all day long, that phone will ring and somebody will answer the phone. And we've spent the bulk of our time dealing with issues that our constituents have. A lot of EDD issues, people trying to get unemployment insurance, trying to get coverage through the CARES Act, federal relief. And sometimes they hit roadblocks or they don't know how to connect to services. So I have staffers who spend all day long trying to help get resources out into the community as needed.
And resources is what's very important at this day and age, due to, again, people are at home. Some people frustrated, as my 16-year-old reminds me on a daily basis, and a lot of businesses are closed. What do you say to the businesses that are closed? I mean, a lot of frustrated businesses that don't know what to do, don't know where to go, and how do we deal with the businesses that are closed now?
Well, it's a real challenge. It's a challenge certainly for the business owners, and it's a challenge for their employees as well. People work to put food on their table and pay their rents. And if those businesses aren't operating and people aren't working, then they're really in a vulnerable situation of not being able to make their rents, not being able to provide for their families. So I believe that we need to get businesses open as fast as we can and to provide them alternatives if they can't physically open. But we also have to do in a way that's safe for everybody, because we'll have a huge economic impact as well as a social impact if we reopen in a way that's not in keeping with what science tells us we need to do to fend off this deadly disease. If we reopen too quickly and infection rates soar and people flood the ERs and people that are primary breadwinners for their families die and succumb to this disease, that's a whole other level of crisis. And so we have to avoid that. So believe me, we all want businesses to open. We all want people to be able to provide for their families, but I think everybody wants to do it in a way that's safe. So that's something that the legislature is working with the governor, and the governor's come out with his 4-point strategy of reopening the economy. I think that within the next couple of weeks, we'll start to see businesses start to find ways of providing their services, but in a way that's safe. So I expect to see retail establishments, for instance, be able to take online orders and be able to put them in people's cars when they pull up, or to be able to measure people coming into their establishments the way that grocery stores do. So that will probably be some of the first businesses that are allowed to reopen. Small offices that can provide for social distancing to their employees also will probably start to be reopened across the state in the next couple of weeks. That's my hope in any case.
Great. You know, I've always said life as we know it has changed. 9/11 changed our lives when we went to security in the airports. Life will never be the same after 9/11. And I say that life will never be the same after this particular incident in reference to how we do business, how do we interact with each other, and hopefully we'll get to some kind of a normalcy very, very soon. How do you see us getting out of this situation that we're in now?
Well, that's a huge question. I would say this. I would say that as we figure out what now, I'm going to put the social part aside for now, the part of how we live our lives if COVID's not under control, if it's still out there for the next couple of years until there's a vaccine or until we have very effective treatments. How do we entertain ourselves? How do we see our friends? That's a whole other question, but let's just talk about economic recovery. I think that it's important as we craft an economic recovery. And by the way, I am involved in those conversations at the state level. I think it's really important that we look at some of our largest gaps and make sure that we don't reinstate or repeat mistakes that we know that we had made in the past. So what do I mean by that? We've been talking for a long time about the social safety net gaps and how so many people live from paycheck to paycheck, that far too many people can't withstand a chronic illness that even puts them out of work for a couple of weeks, or one car repair away from not being able to pay their rent. We've known that that's a problem across our economy, but now we see what happens if we subject our entire culture to those pressures at the same time. We can't go back to an economy that leaves so many people unprepared to weather those kinds of very ordinary life events. We've got to shore up our economy to where more people have more savings in their bank account, where our social safety nets are stronger, that can catch people who have chronic illnesses, people who are living in and working in minimum wage jobs, people who have too much pressure put on them because of exorbitant rents that they're paying. These are things that we've talked about for a long time, but my hope is that this will now give us in some ways the opportunity to fix those structural inequities and those structural weaknesses. And that's not going to be easy. We need to shore up our medical system to make sure that we emerge out of this with a medical system where everybody has access to medical care, where nobody is uninsured, where people are no longer afraid to go to the doctor to seek treatment for anything, especially communicable diseases. But we have those weaknesses now, I think, are shown more clearly through the microscope of COVID-19, and now it's on all of us to fix them.
I agree with you. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take a quick break, come back from the break, and we'll continue and we'll go on and discuss some of these issues and more important issues in the second segment. We'll be
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back. Again, we have with us Assemblywoman Laura Friedman from 43rd Assembly District, giving us some updates as to what's going on in the State Assembly and the state. And we just left off with having some discussions about insurance, uninsured, and some of the other issues in the state. As a conduit between, the cities that you represent and the state, what's the most important thing that you can do as that conduit to be able to get the cities connected to what the state wants and what the city want from the states, from the state?
Yeah, that's a great question. Coordination and communication is even more important in this kind of an emergency. And the cities are struggling with having to provide a level of service that they're not used to providing. And I think that for me in the last few weeks, the thing that's been the most important and that's bared the most results is making sure that everybody understands the resources that are available and that all of those resources are coordinated. A lot of times our service providers, whether it's a homeless provider or a religious organization, whatever it is, operates in their own silo. And they're used to just running the way that they operate with the clients that they serve. And sometimes they don't know that there's resources around them. And when you put them together with other similar organizations or with organizations or entities or agencies that can fill in the gaps, you have a multiplier effect and you can be much more effective in delivering services. So what we've been spending a lot of time doing is finding out where there are those gaps and trying to fill those holes. And I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with one of our largest homeless providers here in Los Angeles County and told them, and they told me that they had applied for a grant several months ago. And it was a very large grant, multi-millions of dollars, and they expected the grant to be filled, but the current timeline was to fill that several months from now. Well, they have the need now. They can't wait months to get that money right now when the need is so huge. So I was able to reach out to the governor himself directly, who said, you get me that grant and we will get that money released this week. Along the same lines, another homeless provider told me that they were frustrated because they weren't able to shift funding from one of the large grants that they had received into providing medical protective equipment to their frontline service workers. So I made a few calls and found out that actually those rules had been changed and they could use that money, but nobody had told them that. So getting back to them and saying, actually, you can use these funds for the areas that you need it the most. So those kinds of performing those kinds of functions of being there for our providers to get them the information that they need as that information changes and getting that out to the community has been something that we've tried to step up right now. I have a social media presence and we spend a lot of time trying to push accurate information. There's a lot of inaccurate information. There's a lot of old information floating around the internet. And so we try to vet every piece of information and get the most current information out to the public and make sure that we do it also to our community groups, particularly our ethnic communities, our Armenian community, our Filipino community, our Korean community, so that they can provide that to their community in the language that they need to disseminate accurate information.
So this groups, the individuals, businesses, could call your office to just kind of ask what type of resources are available, correct?
Absolutely. We are more than happy to get information into people's hands. We'll get it translated if we need to. In fact, I just had that call yesterday. I spoke to the secretary that's administering the unemployment insurance right now in the state of California to independent contractors. And what we found out was that the applications, first of all, are only online. They're not available in paper form. And secondly, they're only translated into Mandarin, Chinese, and Spanish. So I called the secretary myself to say, first of all, we need this information. We need this application available in paper because I got a lot of senior citizens. I've got a lot of people who don't have internet or don't have computers at home, and they can't just be cut off. These are the people that need the money the most. They can't be cut off from these grants just because they don't have a computer. So we need them to have that available yesterday. And we also need to make sure that those applications are available in Korean, in Armenian, and all of the languages that are spoken in our districts, because we need everybody to have access to this, what's really life-saving grant money right now. So I spend a lot of time finding out from my community about gaps like that, about problems with all of these emerging resources. and trying to get them into people's hands and to fix these problems as best I can. I mean, I certainly can't just wave a magic wand, but we can at least elevate those kinds of problems and elevate them right up to the governor if we need to get a problem solved.
Again, sometimes we forget about the people who don't have access to the internet, like elderly, like some people who don't even have computers at home, unfortunately, in this day and age. And we you know, everyone says, well, remote working and doing this and that, and there are things you can't do remotely. There are people who can't remotely access information. And what you said is very, very important, that the grants, when they're only online, is not good enough for people that really need it. Especially
that's right, and the libraries aren't open. So in the past, people can go to the libraries and use computers. And we've heard from a lot of constituents. I myself, I call a lot of people back who call my office after their casework is done to follow up with them and to make sure, you know, to see how things are happening. And we have far too many senior citizens who are telling me, for instance, that the food pantries are telling them that the delivery services, when you sign up, it might be 2 to 6 weeks until you can get delivery. So these are people that are elderly and frail, the exact population we want staying home, that we're forcing to get on buses and go to get food. And that's not acceptable. And Glendale, I will say, is delivering about 6,000 meals a month through their fire department, but not every city has that, and not every person knows that that's available to them. So we try to get information about those kinds of resources out as much as we can. And our cities have been amazing about stepping up their services. And, you know, I thank God that I live in this community where we have so many nonprofits like Armenian Relief Society and the YMCA and the Glendale Cultural Youth Center and others who are providing these kinds of services. Yes, so many who are out there, and they are a lifeline. And I feel like, you know, the city's job and my job is to support their work, to get them funding so they can continue that work, but to make sure that we get the resources out in the community right now when people need it.
Again, I had an email that I sent to the city council, and I told the city council, no other city except city of Glendale requires masks for you to walk with your wife in the streets. And I begged them to take that, remove that requirement, because no other city requires that. There's a little bit of a giving that needs to be done by the city, as far as I'm concerned. I made that very clear. All my friends have asked me to email the city council, and I did. And I basically asked them to please remove that requirement. You're walking with your wife on a street with no one around and wearing a mask, or jogging with a mask is not the most comfortable thing. So I sometimes, once in a while, we have to just kind of, as government officials, have to be cognizant of the fact that people are going through this, and they need to be able to have some leeway and don't feel like they're prisoners. How do you feel about that?
I think that when we provide regulations and guidance to the public, they should be science-based and evidence-based. And I understand the Glendale Council's desire to keep people as safe as they possibly can. But the County of Los Angeles and the state is not recommending that cities require people to use masks if they're outside and not coming into close contact with other individuals. So I think that there is a middle ground. I think that saying if you're in the downtown of Los Angeles, for instance, maybe have that mask under your chin. If you're going to be close to someone, of course, pull it up. But if I walk up to the end of my cul-de-sac with my 6-year-old and my dog, and I know that I'm not going to be coming within 6 feet of anybody, to say that I have to wear a mask to me does sound like an overreach. I would agree. I understand the position they're in, and they're trying to keep people safe, but you also risk a backlash, and you risk a pushback. And I also don't want people feeling that they should be taking photos of their neighbors walking down the block without a mask and putting it on Nextdoor or on the internet to try to shame people. I think we all need to use some common sense and, you know, have some courtesy and understanding about people who might have claustrophobia, who might have asthma and find wearing a mask hard to do, and to require it certainly when you're in a store, if you're going to be right next to someone. If you're sneezing and coughing,
100%.
Maybe you should be wearing it more if you're going to be anywhere near someone. But if you don't have those symptoms and you're going to be able to keep 6, 10, 20 feet away from people on the block, I think it's a bit much.
Yeah, and then we always, if me and my wife are going or somebody's approaching, we're wearing our mask, we put our mask on, but we easily, before that, all we did was cross the street to the other side and walked in our neighborhood. But now police stopped me the other day and told me that I had my mask down with no one around and told me to put my mask on. And I said, there's no one around. When I see somebody coming in, I put my mask on, but when no one is around, within 50 feet of me, it was just a little bit too much. So I'm really pushing to probably have a little bit of a loosening of that so people could walk around at least with their family and not feel like they have to have masks on. And when they're jogging, they don't need to have masks on. So that's one thing.
I don't disagree. I think we should be following, with all of this, we should be following medical advice, and we shouldn't do less and we shouldn't do more because we do risk a backlash. And I think people need clear and evidence-based direction.
I agree with you. And I'm hoping that very soon people will see that phase out sooner than later in reference to businesses opening. And I'm sure you want that in your district, and the state wants that in their state. And I know we're very anxious, and I would hope that we will get that as soon as possible. Again, I wanted to thank you for joining us. We haven't had a conversation like this in a very long time, and I hopefully will have a few more of these in the next few months.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you so much, Albert. Thanks for all the services you're providing to the community with your show.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for watching us today. We'll be back again next week with another edition with somebody new who has a new invention for autistic kids, a robot that he invented, a multi-million-dollar robot, and hopefully we'll have an interview with him, I believe, next week, and we'll air that next week. Thank you. Until next week, we'll see you again.